I never thought I'd see genuine fear in my daughter-in-law's eyes, but there she was, frozen in the doorway of my executive office, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. "Eleanor?" she whispered, her perfectly glossed lips barely moving. Just yesterday, she'd told my son I wasn't sophisticated enough to attend their anniversary dinner at Savoria, the upscale restaurant chain taking our city by storm. Now she was staring at my name on the CEO door, putting together the pieces of a puzzle I'd kept hidden for years. The look on her face was worth every silent holiday and every painful exclusion I'd endured. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was never supposed to be successful, at least according to my late husband Richard. "Eleanor, dear," he would say with that condescending smile, "the kitchen is where you shine, not the boardroom." For 26 years of marriage, I'd nodded and smiled, continuing to perfect my grandmother's recipes while he built his insurance company. What Richard never knew was that I'd been quietly investing my inheritance in a small catering business that would one day become Savoria, the very restaurant empire now worth millions. My journey began in my modest kitchen in Maplewood, a quiet suburb where neighbors knew each other by name and garden achievements. I was 52 when Richard passed, unexpectedly from a heart attack, leaving me with our son Thomas and a life insurance policy that barely covered the mortgage. Thomas was finishing college then, ambitious and bright, but with Richard's same dismissive view of my little hobby, as they called my catering. "Mom, you should sell the house," Thomas suggested during those first difficult months. "You can't maintain it alone, and honestly, your cooking business isn't going to support you." He looked so much like his father when he spoke this way, confident in his assessment of my limitations. What neither of them knew was that my little hobby had already secured 3 major corporate contracts and was generating steady revenue. I'd opened a small storefront downtown under a business name that couldn't be traced back to me, Savoria, named after my grandmother Savannah, who taught me to cook with both precision and heart. By then, I had 5 employees and was negotiating for a second location. I didn't correct Thomas's assumptions. After a lifetime of being underestimated, I'd learned that invisibility had its advantages. People revealed their true nature when they thought you had nothing to offer. When Thomas brought Melissa home for the first time, I recognized the calculating look behind her smile immediately. She was beautiful in that polished, intentional way. Honey blonde hair smoothed into a perfect bob, clothes that whispered of money without shouting it. She was pursuing her MBA and spoke eloquently about market strategies and investment portfolios. "Mrs. Bennett, these cookies are divine," she said, taking a delicate bite of my chocolate chip cookies. "You really should sell these. I'm sure the local bake sales would love them." She smiled at Thomas, who nodded approvingly at her suggestion. I simply thanked her for the compliment, not mentioning that those very cookies were being served in the first-class lounge of 3 major airlines, thanks to a contract I'd secured the previous month. They married within a year. The wedding was lavish. Thomas had followed his father into the insurance business and was doing well. I offered to cater the reception, but Melissa politely declined. "We've already booked Savoria. Thomas's colleague recommended them. They're very exclusive," she explained, not recognizing the irony. "But we'd love if you could make some of your cookies for the welcome bags." I agreed, of course. By then, Savoria had grown to 5 locations across 3 states, and our 6th was opening the following month. My executive team handled daily operations, allowing me to maintain my quiet life in Maplewood. Only my financial advisor and my core management team knew that Eleanor Bennett, the unassuming widow, was actually E.S. Bennett, the reclusive founder and majority shareholder of the Savoria restaurant group. The gradual exclusion began after Thomas and Melissa moved into their new home in Lakeshire Heights, an upscale community where houses had names instead of numbers. It started with missed phone calls, then canceled lunch plans. When I did visit their home, I noticed how Melissa subtly directed me toward the kitchen rather than the living room where they entertained friends. "Eleanor, would you mind checking on the caterers? They respect another woman's opinion in the kitchen," she would say with a smile that never reached her eyes. Meanwhile, Thomas was busy networking with the other husbands, rarely breaking away to spend time with me. The first holiday I spent alone was Thanksgiving, 3 years after they'd married. Thomas called that morning, apologetic but firm. "Mom, Melissa's parents flew in from Europe last minute. It's going to be a very business-focused dinner. Her father's introducing us to some potential investors. Maybe we can do our own little Thanksgiving this weekend?" Our little Thanksgiving never happened. Neither did Christmas dinner, my birthday celebration, or the housewarming I wasn't invited to. Each exclusion came with a reasonable excuse, but the pattern was unmistakable. I had become an inconvenience in their curated life, the unsophisticated mother-in-law who didn't fit their social aspirations. What hurt most wasn't the rejection itself, but Thomas's quiet compliance. The little boy who once proudly proclaimed, "I made the best food in the universe," now seemed embarrassed by my simple clothing and lack of formal education. He had become his father's son completely, measuring worth by degrees and social connections. Through it all, I remained silent about my growing empire. Savoria had expanded to 15 locations nationally, with international franchising opportunities under negotiation. The irony wasn't lost on me when Thomas mentioned dining at our flagship location to celebrate closing a major deal, or when Melissa posted photos from our Chicago restaurant on her social media. "Mom, you really should try Savoria sometime," Thomas once told me over one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "The food reminds me a bit of your cooking, but, elevated." I nearly laughed out loud. The signature dishes at Savoria were my recipes, perfected in my kitchen and scaled by our executive chefs. The famous chocolate soufflé that food critics raved about. My grandmother's recipe with my own twist of cardamom and orange zest. "Maybe someday," I replied. "It sounds a bit fancy for my taste." The most painful exclusion came last spring. I called Thomas on his birthday, hoping to take him to lunch. "Actually, Mom, Melissa's planned something at Savoria with some colleagues," he said, sounding distracted. "Maybe next week?" Next week became next month, which faded into vague some days. Meanwhile, Savoria continued to thrive. We opened our 20th location, and offers for a buyout started coming in. A prominent celebrity chef wanted to partner with us. A hotel chain proposed an exclusive collaboration. I declined them all. Savoria wasn't just a business to me. It was proof of everything Richard and Thomas had failed to see in me. Every successful location was a quiet rebuttal to those who dismissed my capabilities. Then came the invitation that would change everything. Thomas called on a Wednesday afternoon, his voice carefully neutral. "Mom, Melissa and I are hosting a dinner for her promotion next Friday. We'd love for you to join." The sudden inclusion surprised me. "That sounds lovely. Should I bring anything?" No, it's at Savoria, their River District location." He paused. "Just maybe wear something a bit dressier? Melissa's boss will be there, and some senior partners." The implication stung, but I agreed. After hanging up, I wondered what had prompted this unexpected invitation. Years of exclusion had taught me to be suspicious of sudden inclusion. My answer came the next day when my assistant forwarded an email that had been sent to Savoria's events coordinator. It was from Melissa, confirming a private dining reservation for 12 people. The final line explained everything. "Also, we're bringing my husband's mother. She's a bit simple, the homebody type. Could you possibly seat her somewhere not too prominent? Perhaps near the kitchen where she'd be more comfortable." I read the email twice, a strange calm settling over me. After years of dismissals and exclusions, this written evidence of Melissa's contempt should have hurt. Instead, it crystallized. something I'd been considering for months. It was time to step out of the shadows. I called my executive team for an emergency meeting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For years, I'd maintained a low profile, letting our marketing director serve as the public face of Savoria. Few people outside my inner circle knew that the E.S. Bennett, listed as founder, was Eleanor Susan Bennett, the supposedly simple mother-in-law of Melissa Bennett. "It's time for a change," I told my stunned team. "I want the River District location prepared for Friday night, and I want all of you there." My COO, James, looked concerned. "Eleanor, you've always been private about your ownership. Are you sure about this?" I nodded, feeling more certain than I had in years. "Absolutely. It's time for a family reunion." For the next week, I prepared carefully. I visited my personal shopper at Neiman Marcus, a lovely woman who had dressed me for board meetings and investor pitches for years. Together, we selected a tailored black suit with subtle gold threading, professional, elegant, and undeniably authoritative. I had my hair styled at the salon where Melissa herself frequented, choosing a sophisticated updo instead of my usual simple bob. My makeup artist, yes, successful, simple women have those too, gave me what she called her CEO glow. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not just Eleanor the mother, but E.S. Bennett the business mogul. The night of the dinner, I arrived at Savoria's River District location 10 minutes early. The general manager, Sophie, greeted me with the deference usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. "Everything is prepared according to your specifications, Ms. Bennett," she whispered, leading me not to the dining room but to my private office in the back. "Perfect. Remember, not a word until I make my entrance. And Sophie, make sure they're served our best wine. It's a celebration, after all." I settled into my office to wait, watching the security feed as guests arrived. Thomas and Melissa came. In last, she in a red designer dress, he in a dark suit that needed better tailoring. They were seated at the best table, of course. An empty chair had been positioned somewhat awkwardly near the kitchen doors, my designated spot, no doubt. Just as the appetizers were being served, Melissa checked her watch and whispered something to Thomas. He pulled out his phone, presumably to call me. I didn't answer. Let them wonder. After 10 more minutes, I saw Melissa's frustration growing. She summoned the manager, gesturing animatedly. Sophie played her part perfectly, listening with appropriate concern before disappearing toward my office. "They're asking about you," she reported, barely containing her excitement. "Mrs. Melissa seems quite upset that the evening isn't going according to plan." I stood, smoothing my jacket. "Then we shouldn't keep them waiting any longer." The walk from my office to the main dining room was only 30 steps, but it felt momentous. Through the glass partition, I could see Melissa speaking sharply to a server while Thomas looked uncomfortable. Neither noticed me until I was standing, directly beside their table. "Good evening," I said calmly. "I believe you were expecting me?" Thomas looked up, his expression morphing from annoyance to shock. "Mom? Why are you dressed like... What's going on?" Before I could answer, Sophie appeared with the restaurant's executive chef and sommelier. All three bowed slightly toward E. "Ms. Bennett," Sophie said formally, "everything has been prepared according to your specifications. The 2008 Krug is being served now." Melissa's eyes darted between us, confusion evident. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I'm Melissa Bennett. I made this reservation." Sophie smiled politely. "Yes, Mrs. Bennett. And this is Eleanor Bennett, founder and CEO of Savoria Restaurant Group, your mother-in-law." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas's mouth opened and closed without sound. Melissa's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. The other guests, her colleagues and boss, I presumed, looked on with undisguised interest. I simply took a seat at the head of the table. not the chair by the kitchen, and smiled. Please, don't let me interrupt. I believe we were celebrating Melissa's promotion? And that's when I saw it. Genuine fear in my daughter-in-law's eyes as the realization dawned that the woman she had systematically excluded and dismissed owned not just this restaurant, but the entire chain her career. Success was being celebrated in. The woman she had called simple controlled an empire worth millions. I had lived in the shadows long enough. It was time for the truth to be served. Part 2. The dinner that followed was a masterclass in polite conversation layered with unmistakable tension. Melissa's boss, Patricia Winters, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who I'd actually met at several industry events, recovered first. "Eleanor Bennett," she said, recognition dawning. "The Eleanor Bennett who turned down the Horizon Hotel Group's partnership offer last quarter?" I nodded, taking a sip of the champagne that had been poured for me. Their terms weren't aligned with our vision. Patricia laughed, genuine respect in her eyes. Their CEO was furious. Now I understand why Savoria's business model seemed so uniquely intuitive. While Patricia and I discussed business strategies, Melissa sat rigidly in her chair. Her earlier confidence evaporated. Thomas stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "Mom," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You own Savoria? How? When?" I turned to my son, seeing in his confusion the echo of his father's dismissiveness. "I started small, after your father died. Remember my little hobby? Turns out cooking can be quite profitable when done right." The appetizers arrived, my signature crab cakes with lemon aioli. The same recipe Thomas had grown up eating, though he'd never made the connection despite claiming Savoria's crab. Cakes were the best in the city. I watched as he took a bite, saw the moment recognition flickered in his eyes. "This tastes like," he began. "Like home?" I finished for him. "It should. It's my recipe. All of Savoria's signature dishes are." Melissa finally found her voice, though it trembled slightly. "But you never said anything. All these years, while we've been excluding me?" I supplied calmly. "Calling me simple? Seating me by the kitchen?" Her face flushed deeper. "I never—" "Your email to our events coordinator was quite specific, Melissa." I kept my tone conversational, aware of the other guests listening intently. "You wanted me seated somewhere not too prominent. I believe you called me the homebody type." Thomas looked at his wife in horror. "You said what?" Patricia Winters glanced between us, clearly reassessing her understanding of the dynamics at play. The other guests suddenly became very interested in their wine glasses. I hadn't planned on embarrassing Thomas and Melissa publicly, well, perhaps Melissa a little, but their reactions told me everything I needed to know about their character. Melissa was mortified not by her behavior, but by being caught. Thomas was shocked not by her actions, but by the revelation that I wasn't who he'd assumed I was. "Perhaps we should move past this awkwardness," I suggested, signaling to Sophie to bring the main course. "After all, we're here to celebrate Melissa's promotion. Congratulations, by the way. Director of Marketing for Wintercroft Financial is quite an achievement." Melissa nodded stiffly, clearly struggling to regain her composure. The irony wasn't lost on me that her marketing expertise hadn't helped her recognize the brand heritage of the very restaurants she frequented. The main courses arrived, herb-crusted lamb for some, my special cedar plank salmon for others. The conversation gradually resumed, though with a different quality. Patricia and several of the other executives directed their questions to me, eager to discuss Savoria's expansion plans and my business philosophy. "Eleanor, you've maintained an unusually low profile for such a successful restaurateur," Patricia observed. "Most people in your position would be doing book tours and television appearances by now." I smiled. "I've always believed the food should speak for itself." "Well, it certainly does," she replied. then added with a meaningful glance at Melissa. Family businesses are tricky. My own daughter works for a competitor. We have a strict no shop talk at Sunday dinner rule. The subtle reprimand wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Thomas shifted uncomfortably while Melissa stared at her barely touched salmon. As dessert was served, my chocolate soufflé that had been featured in Food and Wine magazine, Thomas finally addressed me directly. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "All these years, you let me think you were struggling. I offered to help with your bills." The hurt in his voice might have moved me once, but I'd spent too many holidays alone to be swayed by it now. "When would I have told you, Thomas? During the Thanksgiving dinner I wasn't invited to? Or perhaps during one of our lunch dates that kept getting canceled?" His face flushed. "That's not fair. We've been busy building our careers. And I've been busy building an empire," I replied evenly. "We all make choices about what deserves our time." The dinner concluded with coffee and polite goodbyes. Patricia handed me her business card with a personal note scribbled on the back. "Let's have lunch without the family drama." I liked her immediately. As the other guests departed, Thomas and Melissa lingered, clearly unsure of the protocol for this unprecedented situation. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that they seemed physically disoriented by it. "We should talk," Thomas finally said. "Maybe come back to our house." I considered the invitation, their first in months. "I'm afraid I have an early meeting tomorrow. Perhaps another time." Melissa stepped forward, her professional mask back in place, though considerably less confident. "Eleanor, I want to apologize if you felt excluded from our lives. We never intended—" "Please," I interrupted gently. "Let's not add insincerity to the evening. You've made your feelings about me quite clear. I'm just no longer in a position where I need to accept them quietly." Thomas looked genuinely distressed. "Mom, that's not fair. We love you." "Do you?" I asked simply. "Because love typically involves respect, inclusion, and honesty. 3 things that have been notably absent from our relationship in recent years." Before they could respond, Sophie approached to inform me that my car was waiting. I thanked her and turned back to my son and daughter-in-law. "This is who I am, Thomas. Not just your mother, not just Richard's widow, but a businesswoman who built something significant. I've always been this person, even when you and your father couldn't see it." I left them standing in the empty restaurant, my heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. The night air felt fresh and clean, like the beginning of something new. My driver held the door open, and as I settled into the back seat, I finally allowed myself a moment of pure, uncomplicated pride. Tomorrow would bring complications, explanations, perhaps even reconciliations. But tonight, Eleanor Bennett, the underestimated mother-in-law, and E.S. Bennett, the respected CEO, were finally one and the same person. And it felt exactly right. For the first time in years, I was fully visible, and I had no intention of fading into the background again. The drive home that night was surreal. Streetlights blurred past my window as I replayed the expressions on Thomas and Melissa's faces. The shock, the embarrassment, the sudden recalculation happening behind their eyes. My driver, Anthony, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Good evening, Ms. Bennett?" he asked, his tone making it a genuine question. I smiled, the tension in my shoulders finally easing. "Better than expected, Anthony. Much better." When I arrived home, I kicked off my heels and padded through my quiet house, not the modest suburban home Thomas and Melissa assumed I lived in, but the renovated Victorian on Willow Lane I'd purchased 3 years ago. It was elegant without being ostentatious, with a professional kitchen where I still tested recipes and a garden that had won neighborhood awards twice. I poured myself a small glass of cognac and settled into the window seat overlooking my Japanese maple trees. My phone had been buzzing with notifications since I left the restaurant. 5 missed calls from Thomas, 3 from Melissa, and a text message that simply read, "Mom, we need to talk. Please." I set the phone aside without responding. They'd had years to talk, years to see me as more than just Thomas's aging mother or Melissa's unsophisticated mother-in-law. Tonight's revelation hadn't changed who I was. It had simply changed how they perceived me. And that distinction mattered. Sleep came surprisingly easily that night. I'd been carrying the weight of my double life for so long that its unveiling felt like setting down a heavy suitcase I'd forgotten I was holding. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through my curtains and the distant sound of birds in the garden. I followed my usual routine, stretching exercises, a light breakfast, of steel-cut oats with berries, and a review of overnight emails from our international locations. The normalcy felt grounding after the previous night's drama. At precisely 9:15, my doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised. Thomas had always been punctual, one trait of his father's I actually appreciated. What did surprise me was seeing both Thomas and Melissa on my doorstep, their expressions solemn and unrehearsed. Melissa's usual perfect appearance showed cracks. Her eyes were slightly puffy, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of her typical salon-fresh styling. "May we come in?" Thomas asked, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I stepped aside, gesturing them into the foyer. Melissa's eyes widened as she took in the soaring ceilings, the original stained glass, the understated luxury of a home purchased with careful consideration rather than flashy nouveau riche tastes. "You live here?" she asked, momentarily forgetting whatever script they'd prepared on the drive over. "For 3 years now," I replied, leading them to the living room. "Tea?" "Mom, we didn't come for tea," Thomas said, remaining standing even as I sat in my favorite armchair. "We came because we need to understand what happened." I raised an eyebrow. "What happened is that I built a successful business while being systematically excluded from my son's life. What happened is that I finally stopped accepting being treated as an inconvenience." Melissa sank onto the edge of the sofa, her designer handbag clutched in her lap like a shield. "Eleanor, Mrs. Bennet, I want to apologize for my email. It was inexcusable." "Yes, it was," I agreed simply. "But it was also honest. Perhaps the first truly honest communication we've had in years." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage self that I felt a momentary softening. "Mom, we never meant to hurt you. Our lives got busy and busy enough to exclude me from holidays, from birthdays, from simple Sunday dinners." I kept my voice level, determined not to let emotion overtake the conversation. "Thomas, I raised you better than that." He had the grace to look ashamed. "You're right. I should have made more effort." "We both should have," Melissa added quickly, though her eyes kept darting around the room, reassessing me and my life with every new detail she absorbed. "But Eleanor, you have to admit, you weren't exactly forthcoming either. You let us believe you were struggling financially." "I never said that," I corrected her. "You assumed it. There's a difference." "But why?" Thomas pressed. "Why keep Savoria a secret from us? Were you testing us? Was this some kind of elaborate trap?" The accusation stung, but I recognized it for what it was: deflection, an attempt to make my success the problem rather than their behavior. "No, Thomas. When I started Savoria, you and your father had made it abundantly clear that my cooking was just a cute hobby. Why would I share my business aspirations with people who had already dismissed them? As for later," I gestured between us. By then, the pattern was set. You had your life, one that increasingly had no room for me unless I was useful. In some way. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. "That's not fair. We invited you to things." "When?" I challenged. The last 3 Christmases? Thomas's birthday? The housewarming for the home you made clear was too sophisticated for my tastes? Which of these invitations am I forgetting? The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken recognitions. Finally, Thomas sank onto the sofa beside his wife. I don't know what to say, Mom. I didn't realize. I got caught up in my career, in our social circle. Dad always said, Your father, I interrupted, was wrong about many things. About me, most. Of all. Thomas looked up sharply. What do you mean? I sighed, realizing that this conversation needed to go deeper than last night's revelation. Your father and I had a complex relationship, Thomas. He provided well for us materially, but he never saw me as an equal partner. My ideas, my ambitions, were always secondary. When I wanted to study business at the community college, he laughed and said I should focus on keeping our home nice instead. Dad loved you, Thomas protested, but with less conviction than I expected. In his way, I acknowledged, but love without respect isn't enough. And you, Thomas, unfortunately learned from his example. Melissa had been watching our exchange with a calculating expression, one I recognized from business negotiations, someone reassessing their position in real time. So, Savoria was your revenge? She asked carefully. I laughed, genuinely amused by the simplification. Savoria was my dream, Melissa. Not everything women do is in reaction to men. I built it because I love food, I understand business, and I saw an opportunity in the market for upscale comfort cuisine with sustainable sourcing. The fact that it succeeded beyond anyone's expectations isn't revenge, it's competence. She nodded slowly, a flicker of something like respect crossing her features. The profit margins must be extraordinary. Your overhead control is practically legendary in the industry. Melissa, Thomas hissed, apparently finding her pivot to business talk inappropriate. It's all right, I said. At least she's seeing me clearly now. Yes, Melissa, our margins are excellent. We pay our staff well above industry standard, use top-quality ingredients, and still maintain a 28% profit margin across all locations. For the first time, I saw genuine interest in my daughter-in-law's eyes. Not calculation, not social assessment, but professional curiosity. In another context, it might have been the beginning of a real connection. I've made mistakes, Thomas admitted suddenly. I've treated you the way Dad did, like you needed direction rather than respect. The admission surprised me. Thomas had his father's pride. Acknowledgments of error didn't come easily to him. Yes, you have, I agreed, not softening the truth to spare him. And it's cost us years we can't get back. Melissa leaned forward. But we can move forward differently. Now that we know about Savoria, about who you really are. That's just it, I interrupted. This isn't about Savoria. This is about who I've always been. Would we be having this conversation if I ran a small catering business instead of a restaurant empire? Would my worth as a mother, as a person, be different? The uncomfortable silence answered my question. I stood, smoothing my slacks with a gesture that signaled the conversation was concluding. I think you both need to consider what kind of relationship we might have going forward. One based on genuine respect and inclusion, not obligation or... I looked directly at Melissa. Sudden interest in my business connections. Thomas stood as well, looking lost in a way that reminded me of his childhood after skinning a knee. Are you saying you don't want to see us? I'm saying I'm no longer accepting the terms previously established. I won't be excluded, condescended to, or treated as an accessory to be displayed or hidden based on your social calendar. Melissa remained seated, her marketing mind visibly processing implications. Patricia Winters was very impressed with you last night. She mentioned lunch. I smiled thinly. Yes, we're meeting next week. Unlike some, Patricia recognizes the value of women who build things. The barb landed precisely as intended. Melissa, flushed, finally standing to join her husband. We should go. We've taken enough of your time. Always a consideration now, I observed dryly. My time suddenly has value. Thomas stepped toward me, hesitation in every movement. Would it be all right if I called you tomorrow, just to talk? The vulnerability in his voice reached past my defenses, touching the mother who had never stopped loving her son despite the pain. Yes, I'd like that. They left with awkward goodbyes, the usual social scripts insufficient for our transformed reality. I watched from my front window as they walked to their car, heads bent in conversation. Thomas gestured animatedly, arguing a point perhaps, or processing his shock. Melissa's responses were shorter, her body language tense. I wondered what recalculations were happening in their marriage, what shifting of blame or strategy. I closed the curtain before they drove away. Their journey home was no longer my concern. My phone chimed with a calendar notification. Executive strategy meeting in 30 minutes. Virtual attendance option available. Life continued. Business demanded attention. I changed into a more casual but still professional outfit and settled. At my home office desk, pushing thoughts of Thomas and Melissa to a compartment I could examine later. The meeting was productive. Discussions about our expansion into the southwestern market, reviews of customer feedback on our new seasonal menu, negotiations for a potential cookbook deal. My team was efficient, innovative, and respectful. All qualities I'd carefully cultivated in Savoria's corporate culture. None of them mentioned last night's revelation, though Sophie had undoubtedly shared the story by now. They simply treated me as they always had, as their capable, visionary leader. After the meeting, I took a walk through my garden, breathing in the scent of late-blooming roses and fresh herbs. The garden had always been my thinking space, where I worked through challenges both personal and professional. Today, I found myself contemplating not just Thomas and Melissa, but the larger pattern of my life. I had spent decades accommodating others' perceptions of me, Richard's dismissiveness, Thomas's inherited assumptions, Melissa's social calculations. I had built Savoria partly in response to those limitations, creating a space where my vision and values could flourish unrestrained. But in doing so, I had also accepted the fracturing of my identity, Eleanor, the underestimated mother-in-law, separate from E.S. Bennett, the respected CEO. Last night had fused those identities permanently. There would be no returning to the comfortable invisibility that had, in its way, been a kind of freedom. The question now was, what kind of unified life did I want to build? My phone rang, interrupting my reflections. The screen showed a name I hadn't expected, Patricia Winters. Eleanor, she said when I answered, her voice brisk but friendly. Hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial. Not at all, Patricia. What can I do for you? 2 things. First, I wanted to move our lunch up. I've had a cancellation tomorrow if you're available. Second, I thought you should know that Melissa came to me this morning with some interesting proposals for collaboration between Wintercroft Financial and Savoria. I sat on my garden bench, processing this information. Did she now? Patricia's tone was knowing. Suddenly very enthusiastic about cross-promotional opportunities, employee reward programs, and investment services tailored to successful restaurateurs. How enterprising of her. Indeed, I turned her down, of course. Told her any business discussions would need to go through you directly. Patricia paused. I hope that was the right call. Family businesses can be complicated. Savoria isn't a family business, I clarified. Thomas and Melissa have no role in its operations. Ah, Patricia sounded genuinely surprised. I assumed, given last night's revelations. No, my son works in insurance. My daughter-in-law works in marketing. For you, actually. Yes, and she's quite good at it, Patricia admitted, but perhaps not as subtle as she believes herself to be. So, lunch tomorrow? We can discuss things that have nothing to do with your son or my marketing director. I found myself smiling. I'd like that very much. After we hung up, I remained in the garden, contemplating Melissa's rapid pivot from dismissing me to attempting to capitalize on my success. It wasn't surprising. She had always been ambitious and adaptable. What interested me more was how Thomas was handling all this. His worldview had been fundamentally challenged, not just about me, but about the dynamics that had shaped his childhood and his marriage. My gardener, Miguel, arrived for his weekly visit, greeting me with the easy familiarity of a decade's acquaintance. "The dahlias are magnificent this year, Ms. Bennett. Your adjustments to the soil acidity worked perfectly." "Thank you, Miguel. I was just admiring them myself." He surveyed the garden with professional pride. "Will you be hosting any events here soon? The garden is at its peak now." His question sparked an idea, unexpected but somehow perfectly aligned with my recent reflections. "Actually, yes. I think I will be hosting something soon. Something long overdue." That evening, I sat at my dining room table with a notepad, planning what would either be a new beginning or a final closing of a chapter in my life. Either way, it would be on my terms, in my space, with my truth fully visible. I began to make lists, to sketch layouts, to consider menus, not for Savoria, but for Eleanor Bennett, who was finally ready to set her own table. 3 days passed, with minimal contact from Thomas or Melissa. He called once, as promised, our conversation polite but superficial. She sent an email inquiring about my availability for a proper family dinner soon, her tone professionally warm but non-committal about timing. I responded to both with equal politeness and equal boundaries. Meanwhile, I executed my plan. Invitations were sent, arrangements made, my home and garden prepared. I worked with my executive chef to design a menu that told my story, dishes that traced my journey from homemaker to entrepreneur, from Richard's wife to my own person. Each selection had meaning, each presentation a narrative. The day arrived. Clear and perfect, early autumn sunlight gilding the trees in my garden. I dressed carefully in a sage green dress that complemented my silver hair without trying to disguise my age. Pearl earrings, not Richard's obligatory anniversary gift, but ones I'd bought myself after Savoria's 10th location opened. Comfortable but elegant shoes. A light application of makeup that enhanced rather than masked. At precisely 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Miguel had transformed my garden into an elegant reception space with tables arranged for conversation, rather than hierarchy, lighting designed to create warmth as evening approached, flowers from my own beds arranged in simple, stunning centerpieces. I opened the door to find Thomas and Melissa standing uncertainly on my porch. She wore a conservative navy dress, her usual statement jewelry notably absent. He looked uncomfortable in a suit that seemed slightly too formal for the occasion. "Welcome," I said simply, standing aside to let them enter. "Mom, Thomas began, then stopped, noticing the activity behind me. "Are you having a party?" "A gathering," I corrected, leading them through to the garden. "There are some people I'd like you to meet." Melissa's eyes widened as we stepped onto the patio. About 20 people mingled in small groups, drinks in hand, the soft murmur of conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. She recognized several immediately, Patricia Winters, of course, but also the mayor, the publisher of the city's most prominent lifestyle magazine, and the dean of the business school at the local university. "Eleanor," she whispered, "you should have told us this was a networking event. I would have—" "It's not a networking event," I interrupted gently. "It's my life. These are my friends." Thomas was staring at a tall man with salt and pepper hair who was deep in conversation with my executive chef. Is that Max Reynolds, the restaurant critic?" Yes, he's writing the foreword to my cookbook. I smiled at his astonishment. Come, let me introduce you to everyone. For the next hour, I guided Thomas and Melissa through my world, introducing them to my closest colleagues, to the friends I'd made through business and community involvement, to the people who had supported my vision when Savoria was just a concept on paper. With each introduction, I saw their perception of me shifting further, deepening beyond the simple revelation of my business success. Patricia caught my eye across the garden and raised her glass in a small toast. Our lunch had been delightful. 2. Professional women sharing experiences and insights without the complications of family dynamics or corporate hierarchies. She had become, in the span of a few hours, someone I could envision as a genuine friend. As sunset approached, I gathered everyone for dinner. Long tables had been arranged on the lawn, candles beginning to glow as daylight faded. My staff, members of Savoria's team who had volunteered for this personal event, served the first course, a refined version of the tomato soup Thomas had loved as a child, accompanied by Gruyere crostini. He recognized it immediately. Mom, this tastes exactly like the soup I made when you had the chicken pox? Yes, some recipes deserve to be preserved. The meal progressed through courses that represented milestones. The salmon dish I'd first catered for a local law firm that became a regular client. The roasted vegetable tart that had impressed my first investor. The chocolate soufflé that had become Savoria's signature dessert. With each course, I shared a brief story, not to dominate the conversation, but to weave together the narrative of a life fully lived. Thomas grew quieter as the evening progressed, his initial discomfort giving way to something more contemplative. Melissa, conversely, became more animated, engaging with other guests, asking thoughtful questions about Savoria's history and my business philosophy. After dessert, as coffee was being served, I clinked my glass gently to gather everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming tonight, I began. Each of you represents a part of my journey, as a businesswoman, as a community member, as a friend. I've been blessed with a life richer than I could have imagined when I started Savoria, with nothing but recipes and determination. Murmurs of appreciation circulated around the tables. I continued, my eyes finding Thomas in the soft candlelight. Some of you know that recent events prompted me to reflect on the compartmentalization I've maintained between my personal and professional lives. For too long, I allowed others' perceptions to define me, accepting limitations that were never mine to begin with. Patricia nodded encouragingly. Thomas stared at his coffee cup. Tonight is about integration, bringing together all the parts of who I am, honoring both where I've come from and where I'm going. It's about celebrating connections that sustain us and reconsidering those that diminish us. I raised my glass. To authenticity, to new beginnings, and to the endless possibility of becoming more fully ourselves. Thank you for being part of my story. As glasses were raised and conversations resumed, Thomas approached me, his expression difficult to read in the gathering darkness. Can we talk? Privately? He asked. I led him to a small seating area partially screened by jasmine trellises, away from the main gathering, but still within sight. We sat in comfortable garden chairs, the scent of night-blooming flowers surrounding us. This isn't what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect, Thomas? He gestured vaguely toward the party. Not this. Not you having this whole life I never knew about. These people who clearly respect you, who've known parts of you I never bothered to see. The honesty in his voice touched me. I kept parts of myself hidden because they weren't welcomed or valued in the role I'd been assigned. First as Richard's wife, then as your mother, and finally as Melissa's inconvenient mother-in-law. I'm sorry, he said, the words coming out rough and unpracticed. Dad always said. He stopped, seeming to catch himself. No, I can't blame Dad. I made my own choices. I accepted a narrative about you that was comfortable for me because it didn't challenge how I saw the world. I reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses that had formed since he was a boy with scraped knees and boundless energy. We all have stories we tell ourselves, Thomas, about who we are, about who others are. The question is whether we're willing to revise those stories when new information comes to light. Is that what you're doing? Revising your story about me and Melissa? I considered his question carefully. I'm creating space for a new story to emerge, one that might include both of you, but only if it's based on mutual respect and genuine care. And if it can't be? Then I'll continue building a life that fulfills me, with or without your presence in it. The words were difficult to say, but necessary for both of us to hear. I've done it before. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding the choice before him. I want to be part of your life, Mom. The real one, not the version I fabricated. Then you'll need to truly see me, not just as your mother or as a successful businesswoman, but as a complete person with my own history, interests, and autonomy. I'm trying, he promised, starting tonight. As we returned to the gathering, I saw Melissa deep in conversation with my executive chef, her expression animated as they discussed something that clearly engaged her professional interest. Perhaps there was potential there too, not for the opportunistic connection she'd initially sought, but for a genuine appreciation of what we might offer each other's lives. The party continued into the evening, conversations flowing, connections forming and strengthening. I moved through my garden among my guests, fully present as Eleanor Bennett, mother, entrepreneur, friend, mentor, woman of a certain age with wisdom hard-won and success well-earned. Whatever came next with Thomas and Melissa, I had reclaimed, the narrative of my own life. I was no longer the mother-in-law banned from family dinners, nor was I defined solely by my ownership of a successful restaurant chain. I was, simply and completely, myself. And that, I realized as I gazed up at the stars appearing above my garden, was the greatest success of all. The morning after my garden gathering, I awoke to an unusual sound, laughter floating up from my kitchen. For a moment I lay still, orienting myself to this unexpected intrusion. My housekeeper, Maria, wasn't scheduled until tomorrow, and I certainly hadn't invited overnight guests. I dressed quickly in casual slacks and a light sweater, ran a brush through my silver hair, and descended the stairs quietly. The voices became clearer as I approached. Patricia Winters and my executive chef, Daniel, apparently engaged in a spirited debate about hollandaise sauce. The vinegar reduction is non-negotiable, Daniel was insisting as I rounded the corner into my kitchen. Oh, good morning, Eleanor. Hope we didn't wake you. Patricia looked up from the kitchen island where she was perched on a stool, coffee mug in hand. There you are. Your chef is a purist. I was merely suggesting that a touch of smoked paprika might elevate the traditional recipe. Heresy, Daniel declared, but his eyes sparkled with good humor. I surveyed the scene. Coffee brewing, pastries arranged on my grandmother's blue willow plate, Patricia comfortable in my space as if this were a regular occurrence rather than an unprecedented invasion. Not that I'm unhappy to see you both, I said, accepting the coffee Daniel poured for me. But this is unexpected. Patricia had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have commandeered your kitchen. After everyone left last night, Daniel mentioned he was coming back this morning to discuss the cookbook photography schedule. I invited myself along because I have a proposition for you. A proposition that couldn't wait until a reasonable hour? I raised an eyebrow, but without real annoyance. There was something refreshing about this casual intrusion. People in my personal space treating me as Eleanor, not as Thomas's mother or the CEO of Savoria. The best opportunities rarely respect conventional timing, Patricia replied, sliding a folder across the counter to me. Take a look while I help Daniel with breakfast. I opened the folder to find a formal proposal from Wintercroft Financial's charitable foundation. The document outlined a culinary education initiative for underserved communities, cooking classes, nutrition education, and business mentorship for aspiring food entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Savoria was listed as the potential program partner, with my name specifically mentioned as lead mentor. "This is substantial," I said, looking up at Patricia, who was now cracking eggs into a bowl while Daniel sliced mushrooms. "Why Savoria?" Wintercroft Financial doesn't typically partner with restaurant groups. Patricia paused her whisking. "We don't typically partner with restaurant groups. We're partnering with you, Eleanor. Your story, self-taught chef becomes successful entrepreneur later in life. That's exactly the narrative we want for this program." Daniel nodded enthusiastically. "It's perfect, Eleanor. We've talked about community outreach for years. This gives it structure and proper funding." I studied the proposal more carefully, noting the thoughtful details: transportation, support for participants, childcare during classes, seed grants for promising business concepts. "This isn't something you developed overnight, Patricia." She smiled, a hint of mischief in her expression. "I may have been working on it for a while, waiting for the right moment. Last night, watching you tell your story through each course, at dinner, I knew it was time." "And what does Melissa think of this plan?" I asked, curious about my daughter-in-law's involvement in a project that would prominently feature the mother-in-law she'd once dismissed as simple. Patricia turned her attention back to the eggs. "Melissa doesn't know yet. This came from our community impact team directly to me. If you're interested, I'll bring her in for the implementation phase. Her marketing expertise would be valuable. But," she met my eyes directly, "this is your decision first, personal connections aside." The consideration touched me, giving me first choice, treating me as a valued partner rather than an extension of my family connections. I closed the folder, not needing more time to consider. "I'm interested. Let's discuss details after breakfast." Daniel beamed, sliding perfect omelets onto 3 plates. "Excellent. And speaking of your story, Eleanor, I've been thinking about the cookbook structure. What if we organized it not just by course or ingredient, but by the chapters of your life? The early recipes when Thomas was young, the first catering dishes, the signature Savoria creations." As we ate breakfast in my sunny kitchen nook, the conversation flowed naturally between the cookbook project and the culinary education initiative. For the first time in years, I felt my professional and personal lives merging seamlessly. No compartments, no careful separations, just Eleanor Bennett in full dimension. After Daniel left for the restaurant, Patricia lingered, helping me clear dishes despite my protests. "I'm perfectly capable of loading a dishwasher, Eleanor. I'm not just a corporate suit." "Never thought you were," I replied, handing her a delicate teacup to place on the top rack. "You navigate boardrooms and social hierarchies too skillfully to be one-dimensional." She laughed. "Takes one to know one, I suppose?" She closed the dishwasher, leaning against the counter with a more serious expression. "There is one other thing I wanted to discuss, off the record." "Should I be concerned?" "Not professionally. It's about Melissa." I dried my hands slowly, giving myself a moment to prepare. "Go on." "She's requested a transfer to our West Coast division. Came in first thing this morning with the paperwork already filled out. Said Thomas is exploring insurance opportunities in California as well. The news landed like a stone in still water, not devastating but creating ripples of unexpected emotion." "I see. Did she mention why?" Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. "Officially, it's for career growth opportunities. Unofficially, she mentioned wanting a fresh start somewhere they could establish their own identity." "Away from me, you mean?" It wasn't a question. "Eleanor," Patricia said gently, Sometimes space isn't the worst thing, especially after a significant recalibration like what's happened between you three. I nodded, moving to my kitchen. Window that overlooked the garden where just last night I'd imagined new beginnings with my son and daughter-in-law. When would this happen? The transfer could be processed within a month. But, Patricia hesitated, then continued more firmly, I haven't approved it yet. I wanted to speak with you first. I turned to face her, surprised. That's not necessary, Patricia. Melissa's career decisions aren't subject to my approval. No, but our friendship matters to me. And rushing 3,000 miles away seems like an awfully dramatic response to discovering one's mother-in-law is a successful businesswoman. The observation made me smile despite the lingering hurt. When you put it that way, it does seem rather extreme. Besides, Patricia added, gathering her purse and folder, if they leave now, they miss the opportunity to actually know you, the real you. That strikes me as a significant loss, particularly for Thomas. After Patricia left, I moved through my Sunday routine with a sense of displacement, as if the furniture in a familiar room had been subtly rearranged. The news of Thomas and Melissa's potential departure wasn't entirely surprising. What did surprise me was my own reaction. Not relief that complicated family dynamics might simplify with distance, but disappointment that they would choose escape over engagement. I was pruning roses when my phone rang, Thomas's name appearing on the screen. I answered with secateurs. Still in hand, the scent of fresh-cut stems in the air. Mom, can I come over? Alone? His voice sounded strained. Of course. I'm in the garden. 30 minutes later, Thomas's car pulled into my driveway. He emerged looking disheveled, his usual pressed shirt wrinkled, his hair uncombed. He found me deadheading dahlias, a basket of spent blooms at my feet. You didn't mention you were a gardener, too, he said, gesturing to the meticulously maintained beds surrounding us. There's a lot I haven't mentioned over the years. It seemed easier that way. I set aside my tools and gloves. What's happening, Thomas? He sank onto a nearby bench, elbows on knees. Melissa wants to move to California. Says we need a fresh start away from complications. By complications, she means me. He looked up sharply. How did you know? Patricia mentioned Melissa requested a transfer this morning. Of course she did, Thomas muttered, then straightened. Wait, why would Patricia Winters tell you about Melissa's transfer request? I sat beside him on the bench, giving us both a moment to admire the late-season garden rather than face each other directly. Patricia and I are becoming friends. She came by this morning to discuss a potential partnership between Savoria and Wintercroft's foundation. Thomas absorbed this information slowly. So, you and Melissa's boss are friends now and business partners. Life takes unexpected turns. I turned to study his profile, so like Richard's in structure but with a gentleness around the eyes that was distinctly his own. Do you want to move to California, Thomas? His shoulders slumped. I don't know what I want anymore. 2 weeks ago, my life made sense. I had a successful career, a beautiful home, an ambitious wife, and a mother who, he faltered. A mother who knew her place? I suggested quietly. He winced. That sounds terrible when you say it out loud. It feels terrible when you live it. We sat in silence for a moment, a bumblebee buzzing industriously among the remaining flowers, oblivious to our human complications. I told Melissa I wanted to think about it, Thomas finally said. Moving would mean starting over, new job, new house, new social connections. That's a lot to give up just because your mother turned out to be more than you thought? I finished for him when he trailed off. He looked at me directly then, his expression raw with confusion. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, watching me struggle with career decisions, listening to me talk about wanting to make Dad proud. You knew what it took to build something successful. You could have guided me. The question cut deeper than I'd expected. Would you have listened, Thomas? Really? When have you ever asked for my professional opinion about anything? He started to protest, then stopped, recognition dawning in his eyes. I wouldn't have. I would have humored you and then done whatever Dad would have suggested. The honesty was refreshing, if painful. Your father had many strengths, Thomas. He provided well for us. He had unwavering confidence. He knew how to command respect. But he never understood that success doesn't follow a single template, and he certainly never saw me clearly. And I inherited his blindness, Thomas acknowledged. But Mom, that's why I'm here. I don't want to be blind anymore. I don't want to run to California because it's easier than facing how wrong I've been. Hope flickered like a small flame sheltered from sudden wind. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to know you, the real you, not the limited version I've accepted all these years. And I'm saying, he took a deep breath, I'm saying, I need to figure out if my marriage can accommodate that change. I reached for my gardening gloves, needing something to occupy my hands while processing his words. That's Melissa's decision too, Thomas. Marriage requires mutual adaptation. She's embarrassed, he said flatly. Not just about how she treated you, but about being caught doing it. Last night, seeing all those people who respect you, hearing your story, it made her position impossible to defend. Running to California is easier than rebuilding a relationship she never valued in the first place. The assessment was harsh, but not entirely unfair. Still, I felt compelled to offer a more nuanced perspective. Melissa is ambitious and status-conscious, yes, but she's also intelligent and adaptable. Don't underestimate her capacity for growth just because it's convenient. Thomas looked surprised. You're defending her, after how she's treated you. I'm suggesting that people are complicated, Thomas. We all contain the capacity for both, pettiness and generosity. The question is which we choose to nurture. I gestured to the garden around us. Like plants, they grow toward whatever light you provide. He seemed to consider this, his expression softening slightly. You've changed. Or maybe you were always this wise and I never noticed. A little of both, perhaps. I stood, collecting my gardening basket. Come inside. I'll make lunch and you can tell me more about what you're thinking. In my kitchen, becoming quite the family conference room lately, I assembled a simple meal of fresh bread, cheese, sliced pears, and the last tomatoes from my garden. Thomas wandered around the space, examining photos and mementos I'd displayed that had never been in the home we'd shared with Richard. Is this you? He asked, pointing to a framed photo of a young woman in chef's whites, standing proudly beside a towering wedding cake. My first major catering job, I confirmed. Your father thought I was attending a cooking class that weekend. I told him it ran late and slept for 2 hours before getting up to make his breakfast on Monday. Thomas shook his head, setting the photo down carefully. All those deceptions. It must have been exhausting. Less exhausting than the constant dismissal of my aspirations, I replied, placing our lunch on the table. Small untruth seemed a fair trade for a measure of independence. As we ate, Thomas shared more about his conversations with Melissa since my garden dinner. She had alternated between embarrassment, strategic planning, and genuine confusion about how to proceed. She keeps saying things like, "We need to reassess our position now that the dynamic has changed," Thomas said, mimicking Melissa's professional tone. As if our family is a corporate merger that needs restructuring. I smiled despite myself. In her defense, that's how she processes the world. We all use the tools we're most comfortable with. Maybe. He sighed, pushing his plate away. But I keep thinking about what you said, about love without respect. I'm not sure Melissa respects me, Mom. I think she saw me as a suitable partner, for her ambitions. My family name, my career trajectory, my social connections, they fit her plan. But after seeing you last night, hearing about what you've built, I realize that no one has ever looked at me the way your colleagues look at you. The observation surprised me. What do you mean? With genuine respect. Not for what I represent or what I might provide, but for what I've actually created or contributed. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. Dad was respected for his business success. You're respected for building Savoria. But what am I respected for, really? Following a path that was laid out for me? Marrying well? Living in the right neighborhood? I reached across the table to cover his hand with mine. You're being too hard on yourself. You've built a solid career. A career I chose because Dad said it was sensible, in a company that hired me partly because of Dad's connections. His voice was bitter now. Even my relationship with Melissa. Sometimes I wonder if I pursued her because she was the kind of woman Dad would have approved of. This was territory I hadn't expected to navigate. Not just the recalibration of Thomas's relationship with me, but a full existential questioning of his life choices. I chose my next words carefully. It's never too late to change direction, Thomas. Take it from someone who started building a restaurant empire at 52. He looked up, a glimmer of his old smile returning. Is that an official Eleanor Bennett life philosophy? One of many, I confirmed, along with grow your own herbs and always read the fine print on contracts. He laughed, the sound warming the space between us. I've missed you, Mom. The real you, not the sanitized version I allowed myself to see. I've missed you too. And I've missed who I am when I'm fully myself. We cleared the dishes together, falling into a rhythm that reminded me of when he was a teenager, reluctantly helping with kitchen chores while telling me about school projects or sports practices. Now, instead of adolescent complaints, he asked thoughtful questions about Savoria's early days, about challenges I'd overcome, about decisions that had shaped my business philosophy. Would you be willing to show me? He asked suddenly, drying. The last plate. Savoria's headquarters, I mean. I'd like to see where you work, meet your team properly, not just as your son who showed up at a dinner, but as someone genuinely interested in what you've built. The request touched me deeply. I'd like that very much. After Thomas left, still uncertain about California but clearer about wanting to rebuild our relationship, I called Patricia. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting to hear from me. Well? She asked without preamble. Did he tell you about their great escape plan? He did. It seems less certain than Melissa presented it this morning. Patricia made a sound of satisfaction. Good. Hasty relocations rarely solve underlying issues. Now, about our initiative. I've scheduled a meeting with the foundation board for Wednesday. Can you join? I'll be there. And Patricia? Thank you for coming to me first. That's what friends do, Eleanor. See you Wednesday. I spent the rest of Sunday afternoon reviewing the foundation proposal and making notes for the upcoming meeting. But my mind kept returning to Thomas's visit, his vulnerability, his questions about respect and purpose, his request to see Savoria's headquarters. For the first time in years, I felt maternal hope without the sharp edge of disappointment that had become its constant companion. Monday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and a calendar full of meetings. I dressed with particular care, a tailored burgundy suit that my stylist insisted brought out the warmth in my complexion, simple gold jewelry, comfortable but elegant heels. Today would be my first appearance at headquarters since the revelation, at the River District restaurant, and while my team had always known who I was, there was a difference between intellectual knowledge and the public acknowledgement that had now occurred. My driver, Anthony, greeted me with his usual quiet courtesy. Headquarters today, Miss Bennett? Yes, Anthony, and we'll need to make a stop on the way back. My son will be joining us for a tour this afternoon. If he was surprised by this development, he showed no sign beyond a slight raising of his eyebrows. Very good, Ms. Bennett. Savoria's corporate offices occupied 3 floors of a renovated industrial building downtown. Exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and large windows, creating a space that balanced historic character with contemporary function. I'd insisted on a working kitchen adjacent to the executive floor, partly for testing new recipes, but mostly to ensure that food remained central to our corporate culture, even as the business expanded. As I stepped off the elevator, my assistant, Grace, was waiting with my usual morning tea and a deliberately casual smile that didn't quite hide her curiosity. Good morning, Ms. Bennett. The executive team is gathered in the conference room whenever you're ready. She fell into step beside me as we walked toward my office. And there have been 17 media requests since Friday. The story about Melissa's dinner seems to have leaked. I stopped short. What exactly leaked? Grace handed me her tablet, open to a local business publication's website. The headline made me wince. Restaurant mogul reveals identity at daughter-in-law's dinner party. Family drama meets business success. The article was relatively factual, but framed with unnecessarily dramatic language, stunning revelation, shocked family members, double life revealed. Photos showed the exterior of the River District location, a professional headshot of me from last year's annual report, and, most concerningly, candid shots of Thomas and Melissa leaving the restaurant that night, their expressions caught in unflattering moments of confusion. Who could have? I began, then sighed. The other diners, Melissa's colleagues. Grace nodded. Social media posts started appearing Saturday morning. The business press picked it up yesterday. I handed back the tablet, a new complication taking shape in my mind. Has Melissa seen this? I would assume so. It's been shared extensively, within local business circles. This put Thomas's visit yesterday in a different light. Had he come because of genuine personal reckoning, or because their private family drama had become public business news? The distinction mattered. Ms. Bennett? Grace prompted gently. The executive team? I pushed aside my concerns for the moment. Yes, of course. Let's not keep them waiting. The conference room fell silent as I entered, faces turning toward me with varying degrees of curiosity and support. These were my people, the team I'd built carefully over years, professionals who had helped transform Savoria from a local success to a national brand. None of them seemed particularly surprised by recent revelations. They had always known who I was, both as their CEO and as a person with a private life beyond business. Good morning, everyone, I began, taking my seat at the head of the table. I appreciate your discretion during what has become a somewhat public personal matter. Now, let's focus on what actually matters: Savoria's fourth quarter projections and our expansion timeline. James, my COO, nodded appreciatively. Southeastern market analysis is ready for review. We've identified 3 potential locations in Nashville that meet our criteria. The meeting proceeded normally, professional considerations taking precedence over personal curiosity. This was what I'd built, a corporate culture where competence mattered more than drama, where strategic thinking outweighed gossip. It felt stabilizing after the emotional turbulence of recent days. As the team filed out after our productive 2-hour session, Sophie from the River District location lingered behind. Ms. Bennett, she began hesitantly, I wanted to apologize if I overstepped that night. When Mrs. Melissa asked about you, I didn't realize the family situation was complicated. I waved away her concern. You did exactly as instructed, Sophie. The complications weren't of your making. Still, she persisted, seeing it written up in Business Weekly feels invasive. Some of the staff have been asked questions by customers. We've been instructing everyone to respect your privacy. Her loyalty touched me. Thank you, Sophie. I appreciate that, and please assure your team that this will pass. The business world will find something new to discuss soon enough. After she left, I spent the remainder of the morning in focused work, reviewing contracts, approving final designs for our Nashville location, consulting with our legal team about a potential franchising opportunity in Canada. The rhythm of business decisions was comforting after so much personal upheaval. At precisely noon, Grace appeared in my doorway. "Your son is here, Ms. Bennett." I looked up in surprise. "He's early. Our tour isn't scheduled until 3. Grace nodded. "He said he wanted to take you to lunch first, if you're available. He's waiting in the reception area." I gathered my things quickly, curious about this unexpected development. When I reached reception, I found Thomas standing awkwardly near the sleek, modern desk, looking out of place in his conservative suit among Savoria's more creative corporate aesthetic. "Thomas," I greeted him, watching as he turned with an expression of relief. "This is a pleasant surprise, Mom." He stepped forward, then hesitated before leaning in to kiss my cheek, a gesture he hadn't offered in years. "I hope it's okay that I came early. I thought maybe we could have lunch before the tour." I nodded, noticing the newspaper tucked under his arm, today's business section, undoubtedly containing more coverage of our family situation. "Of course, there's a lovely cafe just down the block." As we walked, I could feel Thomas gathering himself to say something difficult. I waited, giving him space to find his words. "Mom," he finally began as we settled at a corner table in the sunlit cafe. "Have you seen the articles about what happened at the restaurant?" I nodded, unfolding my napkin with deliberate care. "Grace showed me this morning. Unfortunate, but not entirely surprising. People love stories about successful women and family drama. Put them together and it's irresistible to certain publications." Thomas placed the newspaper on the table between us, the headline clearly visible. "Bennett Family Feud. Restaurant Empire Built While Son Remained in Dark." "It's humiliating," he said quietly. "Not that you're successful, that I was clueless, that I treated you the way I did while you were building all this." I studied him, trying to gauge his true concern. "Is it the public perception that bothers you, Thomas? Or the reality it exposes?" He flinched slightly but didn't look away. "Both, I guess. Melissa's furious. Says her professional reputation is damaged by association with a family soap opera. Her colleagues keep asking questions, making jokes. It's why she's so determined to transfer to California." "And you? What do you want?" He looked down at his hands, then back up at me with unexpected firmness. "I want to understand, really understand, not just what you built, but how you built it while I was being so blind. I want to know who my mother really is." For the first time since that fateful dinner at the River District restaurant, I felt a genuine opening between us. Not just shock or adjustment or social recalibration, but authentic interest in who I was beyond the role he'd assigned me. "Then let's start with lunch," I said, smiling. "And I'll tell you about the first day I decided Richard was wrong about my little hobby." As we ate, I shared stories I'd never told him, about bootstrapping the early catering business, about the first investor who took a chance on an older woman with no formal training but undeniable talent, about nights spent perfecting recipes while Richard slept unaware upstairs. Thomas listened with growing interest, asking thoughtful questions that suggested he was truly trying to see me anew. "You know what amazes me most?" he said as we finished our meal. "Not just that you built all this, but that you did it without resentment consuming you. I would have been so angry, being dismissed like that year after year." I considered his observation. There were moments of anger, certainly, but resentment requires focus on what others have taken from you. I chose to focus on what I was creating instead. He nodded slowly. "Is it too late for me to make a different choice, Mom? To see you clearly and build something real between us?" The question hung between us, weighted with years of missed opportunities and misunderstandings, but also perhaps with possibility. It's never too late for a new beginning, Thomas, I answered, reaching across the table to take his hand. Now, shall we go see what I've built? And then perhaps we can talk about what you might want to build. In your career, in your marriage, in your life. He smiled, a genuine expression that reminded me of the little boy who had once looked at me with uncomplicated love. I'd like that very much. As we left the cafe, heading back toward Savoria's headquarters, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. The public exposure of our family dynamics had accelerated a reckoning that was perhaps long overdue. Whether Thomas would truly commit to this new understanding, whether Melissa would choose California over reconciliation, whether I could fully integrate the separate facets of my life, these questions remained unanswered. But for now, walking beside my son toward the company I had built, I allowed myself to hope that sometimes painful revelations could lead to authentic healing, and that perhaps being banned from a family dinner had been the beginning, not the end of a story worth telling. The headquarters tour exceeded all my expectations. Watching Thomas absorb the scope of what I'd built, moving from the gleaming test kitchens to the marketing department's creative space, from the financial team's analytical hub to the research and development lab where new menu concepts were born, I saw recognition dawning in his eyes with each introduction, each explanation, each proud team member eager to share their work with the founder's son. "Mom, this is..." He paused in my office doorway, taking in the wall of awards, the framed covers of culinary magazines featuring Savoria dishes, the large windows overlooking the city I'd made my business home. This is extraordinary. James, my COO, who had joined us for part of the tour, nodded in agreement. "Your mother is extraordinary, Thomas. We wouldn't be where we are without her vision and tenacity." Thomas turned to study a photo I kept on my credenza, the original Savoria location on its opening day, me standing nervously in front with 5 employees. "How many people work for you now?" "Just over 400 across all locations," I replied. "Plus the corporate team here." He shook his head slowly. "And I thought managing my team of 12 was impressive." James excused himself tactfully, leaving us alone in my office. Thomas moved to the window, looking out at the city skyline in the late afternoon light. "Why insurance?" I asked quietly, joining him at the window. "Was it really what you wanted, or was it what your father wanted for you?" He didn't answer immediately, his reflection in the glass thoughtful and somehow younger than the man who stood beside me. "I never really considered alternatives," he finally said. "Dad talked about the family legacy, about me joining his firm since I was in high school. It seemed predetermined. Nothing is predetermined, Thomas. That's perhaps the most important lesson I've learned." He turned to face me directly. "Is that why you didn't guide me towards something else? Because you were letting me make my own choices?" The question held no accusation, just genuine curiosity. I considered it carefully. "Partly, but I also knew that pushing against your father's influence would only create conflict without necessarily opening your mind. You weren't ready to see alternatives then. And now? Now you're asking questions you never asked before. That suggests readiness for change, if that's what you want." He moved away from the window, circling my desk with newfound interest, picking up a promotional mock-up for our upcoming cookbook. What if I don't know what I want, other than not wanting to be the clueless son in the business section anymore? I smiled. That's a starting point. Knowing what you don't want often precedes discovering what you do want. We completed the tour with visits to our digital marketing team and the customer experience department, both relatively new additions that reflected Savoria's evolution from a single restaurant to a multifaceted brand. Throughout, Thomas asked insightful questions that surprised me with their perception. Perhaps his years in insurance had given him more business acumen than I'd credited. As we prepared to leave, my executive assistant approached with a discreet message. Ms. Bennett, Ms. Winters called. She asked if you could join her for dinner tonight at 7:30. She said to tell you it's regarding developments in the situation. We discussed. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Patricia Winters again? You two seem to have become quite close. She's a straightforward person. I appreciate that quality. I turned to my assistant. Please tell her I'll be there. In the elevator descending to the lobby, Thomas cleared his throat awkwardly. Mom, I know this is presumptuous given everything, but would it be possible for me to join you and Patricia for dinner? There are some things I'd like to discuss with both of you. The request surprised me. Regarding Melissa's transfer? Among other things. His expression was difficult to read. I've been doing a lot of thinking since yesterday. I studied him for a moment, trying to discern his motivation. Was this another attempt to manage the situation? To reassert control over a narrative that had slipped from his grasp? Or was it genuine interest in finding a path forward? I'll check with Patricia, I said finally as the elevator doors opened. It's her invitation. Thomas nodded, accepting the boundary. Of course. Thank you for today, Mom, for showing me all this, for answering my questions. It means a lot. We parted in the lobby with an awkward but sincere hug, our physical relationship as much in need of recalibration as our emotional one. As I watched him walk to his car, I found myself hoping that his request to join dinner represented a step toward authentic engagement rather than damage control. Back in my office, I called Patricia directly. Eleanor, she answered immediately. I was hoping to hear from you. There have been developments. So, my assistant mentioned. Thomas has asked to join us for dinner. He says he has things to discuss. With both of us. A thoughtful pause. Interesting. Did he mention what things? Not specifically. He says he's been doing a lot of thinking. Haven't we all? Patricia remarked dryly. Yes, bring him along. I've reserved the private dining room at Astor's, 7:30. And Eleanor? Yes, bring your battle armor. Melissa has made some moves today that you should be aware of. The cryptic warning left me unsettled as I finished my workday and returned home to change for dinner. What moves could Melissa have made that would concern Patricia enough to warn me? The California transfer request seemed straightforward, enough, if somewhat reactive. What else could be happening? I chose a midnight blue dress with a structured jacket, professional but not severe, and arrived at Astor's precisely at 7:30. Thomas was already waiting outside, looking nervous but determined in a fresh suit that suggested he'd gone home to change as well. Mom, he greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek. Thanks for letting me join. Is Patricia here yet? Not yet. I studied him in the restaurant's subtle lighting. Thomas, what's this about? What's happened that couldn't wait? Before he could answer, Patricia's town car pulled up. She emerged, looking every inch the financial executive. Elegant gray suit, perfectly coiffed silver hair, the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power. But I caught the tension around her eyes as she approached us. Eleanor, Thomas. She nodded to each of us. Shall we? I've asked that we not be disturbed except for service. The private dining room at Astor's was tastefully intimate. Just 6 seats at a round table draped in crisp linen, soft lighting from Art Deco sconces, a wall of wine bottles adding warmth to the space. We settled in, Patricia immediately signaling for the waiter to pour wine without waiting for the usual preliminaries. I appreciate directness, she began once the waiter had departed. So I'll get to the point. Thomas, your wife came to me this afternoon not only to formalize her transfer request, but to propose a rather unusual arrangement. Thomas tensed beside me. What kind of arrangement? Patricia took a measured sip of her wine. Melissa has suggested that she could manage a special marketing initiative around your mother's story, positioning Eleanor as a female entrepreneurial icon for Wintercroft Financial's Women in Business campaign. She's already drafted concepts and spoken with our creative team. I set my wine glass down carefully. Without consulting me. Without consulting anyone properly, Patricia confirmed. She circumvented normal channels, leveraging her relationship with several board members to get a preliminary hearing this afternoon. Thomas's face had drained of color. I had no idea. She told me she was working late on a presentation. She was, Patricia said. Just not the presentation you assumed. The proposal itself isn't without merit. Eleanor's journey is compelling and aligns with our corporate values around female leadership. But the timing and approach are opportunistic and presumptuous, I finished. Using my story for corporate marketing without my involvement or consent. Thomas looked genuinely distressed. Mom, I swear I didn't know about this. This isn't what I wanted to discuss tonight at all. Patricia raised an eyebrow. What did you want to discuss, Thomas? He straightened, some resolve returning to his expression. My future. At the dinner in your garden, Mom, you helped me see something I've been avoiding for years. I've been living according to others' expectations instead of my own ambitions. And what are your ambitions? I asked, curious despite the tension surrounding Melissa's maneuver. That's just it, he said, leaning forward earnestly. For the first time in my adult life, I'm allowing myself to explore that question without filtering it through Dad's expectations or Melissa's plans. And what keeps coming back to me is food. Patricia and I exchanged surprised glances. Food? I echoed. Thomas nodded, unexpected animation brightening his features. I've always loved cooking, Mom. Remember how I used to help you in the kitchen? Before Dad said it wasn't a suitable hobby for a young man going into business? It's the one thing I've always found joy in, even if I pushed it aside to focus on being Richard Dawson's son. The revelation stunned me. Thomas helping in the kitchen was a cherished memory I'd assumed he'd forgotten, rolling out cookie dough with serious concentration, proudly presenting slightly misshapen dinner rolls to Richard, who had indeed discouraged these domestic inclinations, in favor of more masculine pursuits like golf and investment club. You never mentioned this, I said softly. Not once in all these years. Because it seemed childish and irrelevant to the path I was on, he admitted. But seeing your headquarters today, understanding what you built from your passion for food, it awakened something I've kept buried. Patricia watched our exchange with keen interest. And how does this revelation relate to Melissa's unsanctioned marketing pitch? Or to California? Thomas exhaled slowly. That's what I wanted to discuss with both of you. I don't want to go to California. I want to stay here and explore this part of myself I've neglected. But Melissa is determined to leave, especially after the media coverage. And after seeing today's articles, I understand why. What articles? I asked sharply. I saw this morning's business section, but there's more, Patricia interjected, pulling out her tablet and sliding it across to me. The story has evolved from business revelation to family drama. Someone has been talking to the press. The screen showed a lifestyle website's homepage with the headline, Exclusive, Inside the Bennett Family Feud, Daughter-in-Law Speaks Out About Restaurant Queen's Double Life. My stomach dropped as I scanned the article. Though Melissa wasn't directly quoted, sources close to the family described a calculating mother-in-law who had deliberately concealed her success to test her son and daughter-in-law, culminating in a public humiliation at a professional dinner. The piece painted me as manipulative and Thomas as a victim of maternal game-playing. This is absurd, I breathed, pushing the tablet away. We know, Thomas interrupted firmly. At least I know. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I need to decide what matters most to me now. Supporting Melissa's desire to escape this situation, or finally pursuing what I actually want in life. Patricia reclaimed her tablet, her expression thoughtful. Which brings us to an interesting convergence of circumstances. Eleanor, you were going to tell Thomas about our foundation proposal eventually. I nodded, still processing the implications of Melissa's media machinations. The Culinary Education Initiative. What initiative? Thomas asked. Patricia outlined the proposal she'd brought to my kitchen just days ago. The culinary training program for underserved communities, the business mentorship component, the focus on creating pathways for non-traditional entrepreneurs. Your mother would be the cornerstone, she explained. Her expertise, her story, her hands-on guidance for participants. We've been developing the concept for months, waiting for the right moment to approach her. Thomas listened intently, his expression gradually shifting from interest to something deeper. This sounds incredible. Teaching people not just cooking skills, but how to build businesses around food. Exactly, Patricia confirmed. We believe food entrepreneurship offers a uniquely accessible path for those without traditional advantages. Immigrants, career changers, people without college degrees, but with valuable skills and cultural knowledge. I watched Thomas carefully as he absorbed the information, noting how his posture changed, how genuine enthusiasm replaced the awkward tension he'd carried earlier. You're interested in this type of work, I observed, not just conceptually, but personally. He met my gaze directly. I am, more than I've been interested in insurance portfolios and risk assessments for my entire career. Patricia set down her wine glass with a decisive click. Well, this is serendipitous. Eleanor, remember how we discussed needing someone to manage the day-to-day operations of the initiative while you provide the vision and periodic masterclasses? I saw immediately where she was heading. We did. Someone with business experience but also personal passion for the mission. Thomas looked between us, comprehension dawning slowly. Are you suggesting— Nothing is being suggested yet, I cautioned, unwilling to leap toward solutions before fully understanding the situation. Thomas, we need to be clear about what's happening here. Melissa has taken steps that affect all of us, requesting a transfer, speaking to the media, proposing marketing campaigns around my story without consent. Before discussing any potential opportunity, I need to know where you stand with her plans. He nodded, accepting the redirection. That's fair. The truth is, Mom, things have been strained between us for longer than I've admitted, even to myself. Melissa and I work well as a professional team, but as partners. He trailed off, searching for words. You want different things, Patricia. Supplied matter-of-factly. Increasingly, yes. She's focused on advancement, status, creating the perfect external appearance. I've gone along with it because it seemed easier than questioning what I actually wanted. He looked at me with newfound clarity. But seeing you reclaim your full identity has made me realize how much of myself I've compromised. The waiter appeared with our appetizers, a welcome interruption that gave us all a moment to gather our thoughts. As we began eating, Patricia steered the conversation toward practicalities. Thomas, setting aside personal complications for a moment, would you genuinely be interested in working with a program like the one we're developing? It would be a complete career change, a significant pay cut initially, and a step away from the corporate world you've known. Yes, he said without hesitation. Absolutely yes. Even if Melissa opposes it? I asked quietly. Even if it creates more strain in your marriage? He set down his fork, expression solemn. Mom, I think Melissa and I are heading toward a crossroads regardless of what happens with this opportunity. Her actions today, going to the press, trying to capitalize on your story without your involvement, those aren't the actions of someone investing in our family healing. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. People reveal themselves in times of upheaval. The question is whether what's revealed can be integrated into a shared future. The remainder of our dinner evolved into a surprisingly productive planning session. Patricia outlined the foundation's timeline, the resources already committed, the partnerships being developed with local community colleges and food suppliers. I shared my vision for the curriculum, the values I wanted to instill, the barriers I hoped to address for aspiring food entrepreneurs without traditional advantages. Thomas listened with growing enthusiasm, occasionally offering insights from his own business experience that added valuable perspective. By dessert, a framework had emerged that felt not just viable, but exciting. A program that could genuinely impact lives while allowing each of us to contribute our unique strengths. "We should formalize next steps," Patricia said as our coffee arrived. "Thomas, you'll need to have some difficult conversations with Melissa. Eleanor, we'll need to draft a formal response to the media narrative that's developing, and I'll need to address Melissa's unauthorized marketing pitch with our board." "I'd like us to proceed carefully," I cautioned. "Whatever tensions exist between Melissa and me, she's still Thomas's wife. And while I'm disturbed by her actions, I don't want to create irreparable damage if reconciliation is possible." Thomas reached over to squeeze my hand, a spontaneous gesture of appreciation that felt like a bridge being rebuilt between us. "Thank you for that, Mom. I don't know what will happen with Melissa and me, but I do know I want to move forward with integrity." As we prepared to leave, Patricia pulled me aside while Thomas settled the bill, having insisted, to my surprise, on paying for the three of us. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "are you sure about this? Bringing Thomas into the foundation project creates personal complications that could impact its success." I considered her concern. "Nothing worth doing comes without risk, Patricia, including friendship with a business competitor's marketing director." She smiled, acknowledging the parallel. "Fair point. Just promise me you'll maintain professional boundaries if we move forward. The initiative is too important to be derailed by family dynamics." "Agreed," I assured her. "But I believe Thomas deserves the chance to discover his own path, even if it intersects with mine. I spent too many years being defined by others' limitations. I won't impose that on him now." Thomas rejoined us, and we walked together into the cool evening air. For a moment, the three of us stood in a loose circle, an unlikely alliance of individuals whose lives had unexpectedly converged around shared values and new possibilities. "I should get home," Thomas said finally. "Melissa will be waiting. We have a lot to discuss." "Be gentle but honest," I advised. "Whatever happens, remember that you're reclaiming your authentic self. That's not something you should apologize for." He nodded, then surprised me with a warm hug. "Thank you, Mom. For today, for tonight, for seeing me as I could be, not just as I've been." After Thomas departed, Patricia turned to me with a knowing look. "He's more like you than either of you realized. That same quiet determination beneath the accommodating exterior." "Perhaps," I allowed. "But he's facing a more difficult conversation tonight than I ever had to have with Richard. At least my husband never knew what he'd dismissed." "Sometimes clarity is worth the discomfort it creates," Patricia observed. "Good night, Eleanor. Call me tomorrow after you've had time to process everything. We'll develop a strategy for addressing the media situation." I returned home to a house that felt different somehow, not emptier for having been filled with Thomas's renewed presence in my life, but more spacious, as if possibilities were expanding within its walls. I moved through my evening routine with contemplative calm, considering the day's revelations and the potential paths forward. Thomas's interest in food and entrepreneurial education had surprised me completely. Had I been so focused on my own journey that I'd missed signs of his suppressed passions, or had he hidden them so thoroughly that even a mother's eye couldn't discern them? Perhaps both were true, mutual blind spots created by years of prescribed roles and limited expectations. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message. "Thomas. Conversation with Melissa ongoing. Difficult, but necessary. Thank you for tonight. It meant more than you know. I responded simply, I'm here whatever happens. Rest well. Sleep came easily that night, untroubled by the media narratives or Melissa's machinations. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, I had reconnected with my son in a way that felt authentic and hopeful. The rest would unfold as it needed to. Morning arrived with golden autumn light and a notification that Savoria's social media accounts had experienced significant overnight growth. The public was evidently fascinated by the story of the secret restaurant mogul now emerging in the press. My PR director had already sent 3 urgent messages requesting guidance on our official response. I was reviewing her suggested statements when my doorbell rang, unexpectedly early for a business day. I opened the door to find Melissa standing on my porch, looking simultaneously polished and exhausted. Her designer suit was impeccable, her makeup flawless, but the shadows under her eyes told a different story. "Eleanor," she said formally, "may I come in? I believe we have matters to discuss." I stepped aside, allowing her entry into my home. Unlike Thomas's previous visit, she showed no interest in her surroundings, moving directly to my living room, with the focused purpose of someone executing a business strategy. "Would you like coffee?" I offered, maintaining the civilities despite the obvious tension. "No, thank you. I won't be staying long." She remained standing, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. "I assume Thomas told you about our conversation last night. He mentioned you were discussing important matters. He didn't share details." She nodded, as if this confirmed something for her. Always the discreet mother now. "Well, I'll be direct. Thomas has decided he wants to pursue this culinary education project with you and Patricia. He's talking about leaving his position at the firm, about finding his authentic path." Her tone made clear what she thought of this sudden redirection. "That's between you and Thomas," I replied carefully. "The foundation initiative has been in development for months, long before recent events. If Thomas is interested in being part of it, that's his decision to make." "Is it?" Melissa's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. "Or is this another manipulation? The famous Eleanor Bennett orchestrating events from behind the scenes, testing whether her son will finally choose her over his wife?" The accusation stung with its unfairness. "Melissa, I've never asked Thomas to choose between us. Not once in all the years you've been married. No, you just hid your success, letting us believe you were a simple homemaker, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal your empire and make us look foolish." Her voice remained controlled, but I could see the anger simmering beneath her professional veneer. "Is that how you've interpreted events?" I asked, genuinely curious about her. Perspective. That this was all an elaborate test? What else could it be? You let us exclude you, underestimate you, all while building a restaurant empire in secret. The perfect revenge on the daughter-in-law who didn't appreciate you. I sighed, gesturing, for her to sit though I remained standing. "Melissa, my business was never about you, or about Thomas. It was about me, my passion, my abilities, my desire to create something meaningful. Not everything women do revolves around family dynamics." She remained standing, unmoved by my explanation. "Regardless of your intentions, the result is the same. My professional reputation has been compromised. My husband is suddenly questioning our entire life together. And you're being celebrated as some kind of feminist icon while I'm cast as the shallow, status-obsessed villain. I didn't speak to the press, Melissa. Those narratives aren't coming from me." She had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. "The press draws its own conclusions. The point is, I came here to tell you directly that I'm accepting the California position. I leave next week. And Thomas? Thomas needs to decide what matters most to him, the life we've built together, or this sudden midlife crisis inspired by his mother's revelation." She adjusted her bag, preparing to leave. "I've made my position clear. If he chooses to stay, to pursue this new direction, He does so understanding what it means for our marriage. The ultimatum hung in the air between us, stark, uncompromising, and ultimately sad in its limitation of possibilities. I felt a surprising wave of compassion for this driven, young woman who saw relationships as transactions and life choices as strategic moves on a career board. "Melissa," I said gently, "has it occurred to you that Thomas might be discovering what truly fulfills him, just as I did years ago? That his interest in food entrepreneurship might be a genuine passion worth supporting, not a betrayal to manage?" She paused by the door, something vulnerable briefly crossing her features before the professional mask returned. "We had a plan, Eleanor, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. Executive leadership by 40, board positions by 50, early retirement with substantial assets. That was our agreement." "Plans change," I offered. "People change. The question is whether your relationship can accommodate growth that doesn't follow the predetermined script. Some would call that growth. Others would call it breaking commitments." She opened the door, then turned back with one parting remark. "You never fit the role of traditional mother-in-law, Eleanor. I see that clearly now. But neither have I've been just the daughter-in-law who excluded you from dinner. We're both more complicated than the stories being told about us." With that, she left, her car pulling away from my curb with decisive speed. I stood in my doorway, watching until she turned the corner, reflecting on her final observation. She was right, of course. We were both more complicated than the simplistic narratives being constructed around us. Neither villain nor victim, just imperfect people navigating changing circumstances with the tools and perspectives available to us. I closed my door, returning to my interrupted morning with a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever Thomas decided, whatever path Melissa chose, my own direction remained clear. I had a business to run, a foundation initiative to develop, and a life to live authentically. The rest would unfold as it needed to, one honest conversation at a time. The next 3 weeks unfolded with the steady rhythm of autumn, leaves turning, temperatures cooling, and lives rearranging themselves into new patterns. True to her word, Melissa departed for California 5 days after our confrontation in my living room. Thomas helped her pack, drove her to the airport, and returned to their home alone. His expression a complex mixture of grief and relief when he arrived at my door that evening. "She's gone," he said simply, accepting the cup of tea I offered. Temporary separation, she called it. Space to reassess our priorities. I nodded, giving him time to process his emotions without rushing to comfort or advise. We sat in companionable silence in my kitchen, the space that had somehow become the heart of our renewed relationship. "I'm not following her," he said. Finally, his voice steadier than I'd expected. "For the first time in our marriage, possibly in my entire adult life, I'm making a choice based on what I truly want, rather than what others expect of me." "And what do you want, Thomas?" I asked. He looked up, a new certainty in his eyes. "To learn everything I can about food entrepreneurship, to help others build businesses around their culinary passions, to see if I have any talent of my own. In the kitchen after all these years." The simplicity and clarity of his answer touched me deeply. This was not the Thomas who had defined himself through Richard's expectations or Melissa's ambitions. This was someone new, or perhaps someone who had been there all along, waiting for permission to emerge. "Then that's what we'll focus on," I said, rising to refill our teacups. "One step at a time." Those steps began the very next day. Thomas submitted his resignation to the insurance firm, negotiating a reasonable transition period that allowed him to properly hand off his client portfolio. He enrolled in weekend culinary classes at the local community college, basic skills he'd need if he was to understand the educational component of our foundation initiative. He sold the house he'd shared with Melissa, moving into a modest apartment near downtown, closer to Savoria's headquarters and to the community center where our program would eventually be housed. With each decision, I watched him grow more confident, more present, more genuinely himself. The awkwardness that had characterized our early reconciliation gradually gave way to a comfortable rapport as we worked side by side on developing the culinary education program. Patricia proved an invaluable ally, navigating the corporate politics at Wintercroft Financial with expert skill. Melissa's premature marketing pitch was politely declined, her transfer approved with minimal fanfare, and the Foundation's funding for our initiative secured with unanimous board support. Patricia herself joined us for weekly planning sessions, her pragmatic business perspective balancing my culinary expertise and Thomas's growing passion for education. "We need a name," she announced one evening as the three of us reviewed curriculum outlines in my dining room. "Something that captures both the culinary focus and the entrepreneurial mission." Thomas looked up from the spreadsheet he'd been analyzing. "What about kitchen foundations? Double meaning, culinary foundations and building business foundations." "I like it," I said, surprised by how naturally he'd arrived at something. "Both meaningful and marketable." "Simple but effective." Patricia nodded appreciatively. "Good instincts, Thomas. We'll have the design team mock up some logo options." The media circus surrounding our family drama had largely subsided by then, replaced by more substantive coverage of the Foundation initiative itself. I had finally agreed to a single in-depth interview with a respected business publication, focusing primarily on Savoria's growth and my vision for educational outreach. The resulting article, Eleanor Bennett's Second Act, From Restaurant Empire to Culinary Education, helped reshape the narrative from personal scandal to professional evolution. Thomas flourished in ways that surprised us both. His organizational skills, honed through years in the corporate world, proved invaluable in structuring the program. His weekends in culinary classes gave him practical insights that informed our curriculum development. And somewhere along the way, he discovered a genuine talent for teaching, explaining complex business concepts to aspiring food entrepreneurs with clarity and enthusiasm during our pilot workshops. "You're good at this," I observed after watching him guide a group of community college students through a session on profit margins and food costs. "Really good." He looked pleased but embarrassed by the praise. "It's easy to teach something when you believe in its value." I never felt that way about insurance policies. As autumn deepened toward winter, kitchen foundations took shape with remarkable speed. We secured a permanent space, a former restaurant in a diverse neighborhood that we renovated to include teaching kitchens, classroom space, and a small cafe where students could practice both cooking and customer service. Local chefs volunteered their expertise, suppliers donated ingredients, and community organizations helped identify promising candidates for our first official cohort. Through it all, Thomas and I rebuilt our relationship one conversation at a time. Walking through farmers' markets, selecting produce for test recipes, late nights refining budget projections for the program, Sunday dinners where he practiced his newly acquired culinary skills in my kitchen, sometimes succeeding brilliantly, sometimes producing disasters we laughed over together. "I've been thinking about Richard," he said one such Sunday as we cleaned, up after a surprisingly successful attempt at coq au vin. "About what he would make of all this." I paused in drying a wine glass, considering the question carefully. "He would be confused, I think. Your father understood success in very specific terms: financial achievement, social status, adhering to conventional roles. What we're building doesn't fit neatly into those categories." Thomas nodded, scrubbing a stubborn bit of fond from the bottom of a pan. He never did understand why anyone would choose fulfillment over advancement. "No," I agreed. That was perhaps his greatest limitation, and one I accepted for far too long. He glanced up, curious. "Do you regret your years with him?" The question deserved honest reflection. "I regret allowing his perception of me to become my own." I regret the compromises that diminished rather than enriched us both. But no, I don't regret the marriage itself. I smiled at Thomas. It gave me you, after all. And eventually, it gave me the determination to build something authentically mine. He returned the smile, something healing in the exchange. I've been talking with a therapist, he admitted. About Dad, about Melissa, about the patterns I've been caught in. It's helping. I'm glad, I said simply, hanging the dish towel to dry. Self-understanding is never wasted effort. In early December, just as we were finalizing preparations for Kitchen Foundation's January launch, Patricia called with unexpected news. Eleanor, she began without preamble, Melissa has given an interview to West Coast Style magazine. It's out today. My heart sank. Another exposé on family drama? Surprisingly, no. It's actually, well, you should read it yourself. I'm sending the link now. The article, when I opened it, bore the headline, Marketing Executive Melissa Bennett on Career Reinvention and Learning from Unexpected Mentors. The accompanying photo showed Melissa in casual California attire, a significant departure from her East Coast corporate styling, standing in what appeared to be a community garden. I read with growing astonishment as Melissa described her professional transition to Wintercroft's West Coast division, her new focus on agricultural business development, and, most surprisingly, the impact of discovering her mother-in-law's hidden success. Eleanor Bennett taught me an invaluable lesson about assumptions, she was quoted saying. I had categorized her based on superficial observations and missed the extraordinary entrepreneur beneath the surface. That mistake has fundamentally changed how I approach both business and personal relationships. The article went on to describe Melissa's new project, a marketing initiative connecting small-scale organic farmers with urban restaurants, helping sustainable agriculture reach broader markets through strategic promotion. In a way, she concluded in the piece, I'm building on Eleanor's foundation, creating pathways for food producers who might otherwise be overlooked. Our approaches and relationship are complicated, but her influence is undeniable. I set down my phone, processing this unexpected development. Thomas, who had been reviewing application materials for our first student cohort at my dining room table, looked up. What is it? I handed him my phone without comment, watching his expression as he read. Surprise, confusion, a flicker of pain, and then something like thoughtful acceptance moved across his features. Well, he said finally, it seems California has been good for Melissa in unexpected ways. Have you been in contact? I asked carefully. He nodded. Occasional texts, a few brief calls. Nothing substantial. She's been finding her footing, I think, as have I. This article suggests some reflection on her part. Yes, he handed back my phone, though notice she's still professionally Melissa Bennett, not reverting to her maiden name. The observation was insightful. Melissa, maintaining the connection that served her purposes while recreating her identity in a new context. I couldn't decide if it was calculating or simply pragmatic. Perhaps both. What does this mean for your marriage? I asked, treading carefully into territory we'd largely avoided in recent weeks. Thomas leaned back, considering. I'm not sure it changes anything fundamental. We've been moving in different directions, making different choices. This article suggests she's finding her path, just as I'm finding mine. Whether those paths might someday converge again. He shrugged. That's a question for the future, not today. His maturity in facing this ambiguity impressed me. The Thomas of 6 months ago would have either rushed to reconciliation or pushed for immediate divorce, anything to resolve the uncertainty, to have a clear plan forward. This Thomas seemed comfortable letting possibilities remain open, focusing on his own growth while allowing Melissa hers. 2 days later, Melissa herself called. the first direct contact we'd had since our confrontation in my living room. I answered with neutral politeness, unsure what to expect. "Eleanor," she began, her voice carrying the slight echo of a hands-free call. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," I replied, settling into my garden chair. "I've just read your interview in West Coast style." "Ah, I wondered if it would make its way to you." She paused. "I meant what I said there, about learning from you, about reconsidering my assumptions." "I appreciate that, Melissa. Your agricultural marketing program sounds interesting." "It's still developing," she said, something of her old professional eagerness returning to her voice. "But there's real potential here. Small organic farms have incredible products but minimal marketing expertise. With the right strategy, they could compete effectively with industrial agriculture, at least in premium markets." "You sound passionate about it," I observed. She laughed softly. "I suppose I am. It's strange. In all my career planning, I never considered agricultural marketing. But there's something satisfying about connecting quality producers with appreciative consumers." "I understand that satisfaction well," I said, finding unexpected common ground. "It's at the heart of what we do at Savoria." A brief silence followed, neither uncomfortable nor entirely easy. Finally, Melissa spoke again, her tone more personal than professional. "How is Thomas?" "Really? Our conversations have been limited." I chose my words carefully, respecting both her question and Thomas's privacy. "He's finding his way, Melissa. Kitchen Foundations has given him purpose and direction. He's discovering strengths he didn't know he had." "Kitchen Foundations," she repeated. "The culinary education program?" Patricia mentioned it was moving forward. "We launch officially next month. Thomas has been instrumental in its development." Another pause. "I'm glad," she said finally, with what sounded like genuine feeling. "Thomas deserves to find what fulfills him, even if—" She didn't complete the thought. "Even if it's not the path you plan together," I finished gently. "Yes." The word carried complicated emotions. "Eleanor, I want you to know, the press coverage, the narrative about our family situation. I didn't intend for it to become so sensationalized." "Media narratives have their own momentum," I acknowledged. "We've moved beyond it now, focusing on what we're building rather than what was revealed." "That seems wise," she said. "I should let you go. I just wanted to clear the air somewhat, to acknowledge that my behavior wasn't my best self. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more reflection than I'd expected from the ambitious daughter-in-law who had once seated me by the kitchen at family gatherings. "Thank you for calling, Melissa. I wish you success with your agricultural marketing initiative." "And I wish you and Thomas success with Kitchen Foundations," she replied. "Goodbye, Eleanor." After we hung up, I remained in my garden, pondering the unexpected conversation. People were indeed complicated, capable of both petty exclusion and genuine growth, of calculated networking and authentic passion. Melissa was finding her own path in California, just as Thomas was finding his here. Just as I had found mine years ago when I first imagined Savoria. The official launch of Kitchen Foundations arrived on a crystal-clear January morning. The renovated space gleamed with potential. Professional kitchen equipment in the teaching areas, comfortable classroom seating for business instruction, the small cafe area ready for eventual public service. Our first cohort of 20 students gathered nervously in the main hall, diverse in age, background, and culinary interests, but united in their entrepreneurial ambitions. Patricia, elegant in a tailored suit that somehow didn't intimidate despite its obvious quality, opened the proceedings with a brief welcome on behalf of Wintercroft Financial's foundation. Then Thomas stepped forward, confidently introducing the program structure, the mentors, the resources available to participants. Watching him address the group, I felt a surge of maternal pride untainted by the complications of our past relationship. This was Thomas in his element. Purposeful, engaged, alive in a way I'd never seen during his insurance career. When my turn came, I spoke simply about my own journey from home cook to restaurant founder, emphasizing the practical knowledge I'd gained through experience rather than formal education. What matters most, I told them, is not where you start, but your willingness to learn, to adapt, and to remain true to your unique vision. Each of you brings flavors and perspectives that our culinary world needs. The day unfolded with orientation, activities, skills assessments, and a communal lunch prepared by local chefs who had volunteered as program mentors. Throughout, I observed Thomas moving easily among the participants, answering questions, offering encouragement, embodying the bridge between business expertise and culinary passion that made our program distinctive. As the first day drew to a close, the three of us, Patricia, Thomas, and I, gathered in the small office at the back of the building to toast our successful launch. "To Kitchen Foundations," Patricia said, raising her glass of champagne. "May it nurture many successful entrepreneurs." "And to unexpected partnerships," Thomas added, his glass meeting ours. "Professional and personal." I completed the toast with my own contribution. To authenticity. In food, in business, and in life. As we sipped our champagne, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, I had been the mother-in-law, banned from family dinner, maintaining separate identities as Eleanor the underestimated relative and E.S. Bennett the successful entrepreneur. Now those identities had merged, creating space for new connections, new purposes, new possibilities. Thomas set down his glass, his expression thoughtful. "I received an email from Melissa this morning. She's considering a visit next month, professional. Primarily, meetings with Wintercroft's East Coast agricultural clients, but she suggested we might have dinner to talk about next steps, whatever those might be." Patricia and I exchanged glances, both careful not to overlay our own interpretations on his news. "That sounds positive," I offered neutrally. "An opportunity for direct conversation after some months of distance." He nodded. "I'm not expecting reconciliation or resolution, just conversation between two people who have both changed significantly. The best foundation for whatever comes next," Patricia observed. "Speaking of which, I should head back to the office. Board meeting tomorrow morning." She gathered her things with efficient grace, pausing at the door. "Eleanor, lunch Thursday." "Looking forward to it," I confirmed, our friendship now a comfortable fixture in my life. After Patricia departed, Thomas and I moved through the space one last time, checking that everything was properly secured for the night. The kitchen gleamed with potential, student workstations organized and ready for tomorrow's first practical session. The classroom, with its whiteboards covered in business terminology and food cost calculations, awaited eager learners. The small cafe area, not yet open to the public, but soon to showcase student creations, held tables and chairs arranged in welcoming configurations. "We did it, Mom," Thomas said as we stood in the main entrance, preparing to lock up. "Kitchen Foundations is real." "We did," I agreed, feeling the satisfaction of creation that never diminished no matter how many restaurants I opened or programs I launched. And this is just the beginning. He set the alarm system, and we stepped outside into the clear winter evening. Stars punctuated the dark sky above, the neighborhood quiet around us as we walked to our respective cars. "Will you come to Sunday?" "Dinner this week?" I asked as we reached the parking area. "I'm thinking of testing a new recipe for the cookbook, something with winter squash and sage." "I wouldn't miss it," he replied warmly. "I might even bring dessert, if you're brave." Enough to try my baking. I laughed, memories of childhood cookie disasters briefly overlapping with this new reality of adult connection. I'll risk it. That's what family does, after all. Make space for each other's experiments, culinary and otherwise. As I drove home through the city streets, I reflected on the strange, unexpected journey that had brought me here. Being banned from family dinner had proved to be not an ending but a beginning. The catalyst for authenticity that had transformed not just my relationship with Thomas, but his understanding of himself. Melissa's role in our story remained unresolved, her California reinvention and tentative outreach suggesting possibilities without promises. Thomas's new path was still unfolding, his talents and passions finding expression in ways none of us could have predicted. And my own life continued to evolve, expanding to include not just business achievement, but deeper personal connections. With my son, with friends like Patricia, with the students whose entrepreneurial dreams now intertwined with my own experience. The restaurant chain that had once been my secret identity was now simply one facet of a life lived in full dimension. And dinner, once the occasion for exclusion, had become a symbol of inclusion, of coming together with authenticity and acceptance. As I pulled into my driveway, lights glowing welcomingly from inside my home, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with endings. Rather, it was the satisfaction of integration, all the parts of myself, all the relationships in my life, all the work of my hands finally aligned in harmony. I had been banned from family dinner until my daughter-in-law discovered I owned the restaurant chain. But what I'd found in that revelation was something far more valuable than social inclusion or family status. I'd found the courage to be fully myself. Eleanor Bennett, restaurateur, mother, mentor, friend, claiming all aspects of my identity without apology or compartmentalization. And that, I reflected as I opened my front door, was a meal worth waiting for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.